Welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council meeting, August 17th, 2017. Mr. Eddie Smotherman has our prayer and our pledge.
I know we've already been here for a pretty good while tonight, and I'll try and be brief. If you would, let's pray. Lord, I pray we can all remember that we're all made of one blood. Let us encourage one another by displaying peaceful actions, love, and respect. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I want to welcome everyone here tonight. You have several items on your council or your consent agenda, but item B and then item L. Excuse me. I believe that's right, Chief Oaks or Chief Durr. Item L under D. So D L has been withdrawn. B, and then D, L has been
B is
item.
Two items.
Two
B
items.
as in boy and D
Letter
as in
B,
dog. D L.
Letter D, section L.
Mayor, I had one question about E, and I meant to contact the city manager about this earlier today, but the contract with our lobbyist, I don't know, Jim, do you know that contract, are the terms changed in that, or the price went up 12%, and I just wondered what had changed in that contract?
Councilman, I do not know the answer to that. I'll be glad to get it for you.
I do.
You do?
Yes. Mr. Farrer had called, and we discussed, they spent a significant amount of more time than what they did the previous year.
Okay.
We had a ton of legislative issues that they monitored for the city and helped with, and then they also brought on the former lieutenant governor onto the firm, who's going to be also handling our part. So they had asked for an increase.
Increase. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just was.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you. If there are no further questions, I move for approval.
second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales.
Aye.
Harris. Mr. LaLance. Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. You've got the minutes for the July 13th, July 20th, July 27th, August 3rd, and August 3rd public comment minutes. Any additions or deletions to the minutes?
I move for approval.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Under second readings, you have a letter from the Assistant City Attorney regarding Ordinance 17-025 as amended.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. At our last meeting, our meeting on August 3rd, this ordinance was on for second reading. After the ordinance was introduced, there was some discussion amongst council members about what was happening with this ordinance and what else was going to be happening in terms of a zoning ordinance amendment regarding multifamily developments. The ordinance, as back before you again tonight, has been amended from first reading to delete the numerical limitations on multifamily dwellings that without it going through a planned development. After the discussions with council, staff is in the process of creating another amendment That amendment will address the planned development aspect of multifamily developments. What it was unclear as we looked at the minutes, as we looked at the tape, it was unclear whether council had passed this ordinance on second reading or not. We feel it's critical that it be clearly passed on second reading. One of the things this amendment does is create the RS6 zoning, and we have, I believe, 3 applications in process right now for RS6 zoning developments. So it's important that we have clearly passed this ordinance amendment, and that we will be bringing to you soon another amendment that will address multifamily projects as planned developments.
Okay.
Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, so we'll need to consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 17025, amending Appendix A zoning, Section 9, 13, 14, 14A, 19, 24, 25, 26, 27, Chart 1, 2, and 4, in Table 1 and 2, 2017-806.
Move for approval.
Motion second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now conduct a public hearing and consider for approval a certificate of compliance for Binyam Patel, Manish Patel, Kanari Patel, Jigna Patel, and Deepak Kumar Patel at Stones River Liquors, 208 North Thompson Lane. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, when we open our public hearings, if you'll come to the podium, if you'll state your name and your address, if you have any comments to the council, if you'll address those to the council when we close the public hearing, we'll get those addressed at the end of the public hearing. And then if you're representing a group, you'll have 5 minutes. If you're representing yourself, it's 3 minutes. I'll keep up with that. So anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium for this certificate of compliance. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for adoption this certificate of compliance.
Move for approval.
Motion second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 17 RPH 36 adopted by the City Council on July 13, 2017, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider amending the Murfreesboro City Code Appendix A zoning by repealing Ordinance 17014 and replacing it with 17036. Planning staff is the applicant. Notice of said public hearing was published in the July 31st, 2017 issue of a local newspaper.
Mayor, if I may, before the public hearing is opened, my cover letter did not get into the agenda packet that was sent out. A copy of it is on the desk in front of you. A bit of explanation I think is appropriate. Over the last several months, quite a few months actually, staff has been working on a number of amendments to the zoning ordinance, and unfortunately we tracked several at the same time on different matters. What happened when Ordinance 17014 was passed is we gave another ordinance subsection the same number that we had given to a previous in a previous ordinance amendment. As we looked at how we might amend the ordinance that had been adopted and then have an amended and restated ordinance, it appears that it would be simpler to simply replace the prior ordinance with the new one. So we are requesting that by this ordinance 036, we would repeal ordinance 014, and we would replace it with ordinance 036. Now there's two changes from what was originally passed. One is to correct the numerical designation of one of the sections, and the second one is that we discovered after passage that the wording of one of the endnotes, a new endnote to the to Chart 1, could be misleading, and so we just rearranged the wording of it. There's no substantive change. There's no change in intent, no change in what the rules are. We're clarifying the endnote and then giving a clean new number to one subsection. So.
So not the.
But because it is an amendment, it has to be. We have to have a public hearing. Because it's not a substantive amendment, we did not take this back to Planning Commission for their consideration. We're just really a cleanup amendment, and so it's appropriate to come back before council for consideration.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this ordinance change, please come to the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 17036, amending the Murfreesboro, we'll consider for passage resolution 17RPH36.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on first reading ordinance 17036, amending the Murfreesboro City Code Appendix A zoning sections 9 and 31 regarding cell towers, small cell antennas, and underground fiber optic cable, section 27 and table 2 regarding landscaping in chart 1 and chart 4, and repealing and replacing ordinance 17014.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 17RPH37, adopted by the City Council on July 20th, 2017, we'll conduct a public hearing and consider a proposed amendment to approximately 27.34 acres in the Planned Unit Development PUD District located along Las Casas Pike, Emerald Place PUD, Investment Partners LLC, applicant 2017-418. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the July 31st, 2017 issue of a local newspaper.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland, and good evening, council members. Investment Partners LLC wishes to amend the Emerald Place PUD, both the entitlements and the pattern book for this development. Emerald Place was formerly known as Garrison Place, and it's located along the west side of Las Casas Pike, north of East Northfield Boulevard. The PUD was originally approved in 2007, and at that time it included entitlements for a mix of uses, including commercial and residential. Specifically, the PUD allowed 61 townhouses on 15.8 acres, and then various commercial services on 11.5 acres. The applicant wishes to amend the PUD by replacing commercial area C, as shown in the pattern book, with 17 additional townhouses. These townhouses would be located near the center of the PUD, between the existing townhouses and the existing and planned commercial structures to the east. The new townhouses would be accessed from the same private street that serves the existing townhouses. Additionally, we have asked the applicant to install an emergency driveway and gate connecting to the commercial area to the west. The Planning Commission reviewed this amendment at its July 12th meeting and voted to send this forward to you with a favorable recommendation. I believe Mr. Kirby or Mr. Hale may be able to come up and talk more about the project, and staff can answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? All right, thank you. All right, we'll need to open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this PUD change, please come to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Duggar. Excuse me. I live at 2035 Herring Crossing, Rockbridge Cove. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us. This is good news, not negative news, which is, I think, is important that we say that, as well as bringing concerns that we might have to you guys. So we're not here to take a position for or against this rezoning, only to provide you with information of what's transpired to date. When our neighborhood found out that there was going to be some changes, naturally we're all human, and we reject change as our first recourse. And there was a neighborhood meeting called by the developer to listen to our concerns, and we went, and it was we feel like it was a great idea to have that, and we felt like that the meeting was very productive. The following is a brief summary of what was discussed, asked for, and promised. The developer promised to install a fence along the northern property boundary where many of our mischievous youth had roamed through and doing all sorts of things that we didn't particularly like. and that was one of our concerns, so the developer addressed that immediately, and it was a high priority for our community. And it's going to be done, I believe I understood, within 30 days after the rezoning is approved. I think that's was what it said. We had some other minor things that we had been curious about, and one of which was when that fence was installed, if the HOA chose later on to put more fencing in around it, we didn't want to have to come back and get a plan book revision, so we asked that that be made a part of the plan pattern book also, so that when the HOA got the money and wanted to put another portion of fence up, that we could do that without having to come back with you guys and do that. So planning has, I believe, taken initiative to do that, and that would also cover our desire to put a cover over our mailboxes. So again, that's HOA cost, not developer cost. We had asked that, the current phase of Rockbridge Cove be done before construction, any other construction done, and that's being done as we speak. The secondary entrance that was mentioned earlier to provide entrance and exit for construction vehicles, which was another great concern of our community, that was addressed immediately also by the developer. And this was pretty important to us, because we didn't want, after we got everything finished in the development, to have more construction vehicles coming through. And that was, like I said, that was addressed immediately. Our sole intention is to have and maintain the beauty and solitude of our community, and we want to be good neighbors, we want to have good neighbors, and we feel like that with the actions so far, this has all been addressed by the developer for our betterment. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Jugger.
Good evening, members of City Council and staff. My name is Bobby Kirby, and I'm a member of Investment Partners, LLC, who is one of the developers. I'm actually here just to happy to answer any questions that you may have, but as this gentleman stated, I believe he's dead on every point, and in full agreement of all points that we have agreed upon, and so just happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. All right. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and consider for passage on first reading ordinance 17 OZ 37 to amend the conditions applicable to approximately 27.34 acres in the planned unit development PUD district located along Lascassas Pike. Just for the record, we had Mr. Duggar had talked about fencing with the HOA, cover over the mailboxes, the current phase of Rock Bridge. He talked about that. The developer had said that that was all okay. So just as far as we have that in our plan book for staff moving forward, that we've made that. So are there any other questions?
What is a cover over the mailboxes?
Mr. Duggar, you want to explain to us the cover? Sure, absolutely.
Our mailboxes, the way they're constructed, they when the carrier gets there, they open out, and sometimes when it's raining, the carrier has to get the mail wet, getting them into the boxes, and so we want to eventually put a cover over that so that it don't do it.
Yeah, they have a community mailbox.
So that good enough?
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And actually, to be clear, we are installing the additional mailboxes as the developer. The cover over the mailboxes would be added by the HOA at a later date if they choose to do that.
Is this a brick structure or with an aluminum roof, or what are we talking about? I mean, I'm still a little bit curious.
The mailbox is in a brick structure.
Right.
So we would add
And
additional
on it, we
mailboxes within the HOA and brick that. But if they chose to put a roof or a cover over that at a later date, the HOA wanted that right and option to do that.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Sure.
Yeah, the cover wouldn't be brick. You know, it was we had gone through a procedure, a process with planning to get a design approved for patio covers and things like that. and made out of bronze cast aluminum, and they look really great. And so that's what we would probably use. You know, we want something that looks good,
Sure.
you know, but it would also be a good weather structure.
Because right now you have a mailbox bank almost that, and this would be
the
more.
mailbox thing works great. It just when the carriers open it up and it's foul weather, that's when the issue.
I'm going to ask one more question, and I'll try and be very direct on this one so that I don't ask any more. Are you trying to protect the people from the weather who are getting their mail, or are you just trying to protect the mail from getting wet, getting in the boxes?
We're trying to protect, well, the mail, but probably both. The people going to get their mail would naturally be protected, but we're
So
trying
it's
to
coming over
accomplish
the
both.
front and the back, probably, or does
Well,
he
they
vote all over
open
the
all
same
the way
direction?
around.
Okay.
It's not back or front.
I said I wouldn't ask any more questions, and I did. I'm done.
Okay.
We learn something new at every public hearing. So,
We actually have a written agreement that we agreed upon at the planning commission meeting, and I do believe we're on
Yeah.
exactly on the same page.
Okay.
I'm positive.
Yeah.
this is a good example of a neighborhood meeting working. So, glad that y'all did that. All right. Any other questions on this?
Move for approval.
Second.
Councilman Shacklet, Councilman LaLance.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move to item 7. Pursuant to Resolution 17 RPH 38 adopted by the City Council on July 20th, 2017, will conduct a public hearing and consider a proposed amendment to approximately 46.2 acres in the planned residential development PRD district located along Sulphur Springs Road Estates at Prim Springs Road, formerly Oakley Springs PRD. City of Murfreesboro Engineering Department applicant notice the said public hearing was published in the July 31st, 2017 issue of a local newspaper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The City of Murfreesboro engineering staff has requested an amendment to the Estates at Prim Springs PRD. This amendment would allow for the removal of a barricade along Satinwood Drive. The Planning Commission held a public hearing regarding this request on July 12th and voted unanimously at that time to send this forward to you with a favorable recommendation. Sam Huddleston from the Engineering Department is the primary staff member handling this request, and I would ask him to come forward and provide you with additional details on this project.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Good to be here tonight. Sam Huddleston with the City Engineering Department. I have just a short presentation here to set the groundwork for our request. And again, this is for the Estates at Prim Springs PRD amendment. So the request is quite simple. We're requesting that you remove the requirement that Satinwood Drive not be connected to the adjacent subdivision, Prim Springs, until the last phase reaches 75% build out. That was adopted in the planned residential development zoning booklet back in the 2005 timeframe. So our request is to remove that requirement from the zoning booklet. A little background: Estates of Prim Springs was originally approved 2005. Construction progressed, but lot and home construction stalled until the 2009-2010 timeframe. Sewer construction phasing resulted in the need to rephase the development plan, and by that, sewer to serve certain phases was going to be built through the last phase. And because of utility construction, it makes more sense to install water and sewer and then roads and drainage. And so the developer requested a rezoning or rephasing of the development, which they've done. So Satinwood Drive was constructed at the current phase, while Chinook Drive will be the last phase. So that's a bit of a change from their original phasing plan in 2005. A barricade was installed on Satinwood Drive in the fall of 2015 to fulfill the requirements of the planned zoning. The actual physical connection was made, but a barricade was installed to prevent traffic from using Satinwood Drive from both directions. Of course, the installation of that barricade has resulted in service delivery issues for emergency and routine services, as well as other access issues. We'll talk about those in a minute. And then while we're here as the applicant, during recent discussions at a previous city council meeting, it was recommended that staff bring this back to this body in the same form the original zoning was brought, and that is in a public hearing and rezoning request, so that the mayor and council, you could have the benefit of public hearing, public comment before making a judgment on the validity of our request. And so that's why I'm here. The location, states at Prim Springs is on the left. Prim Springs is on the right. Of course, Thompson Lane and Sulphur Springs Road are the main roads leading there. The roadblock or the barricade is shown there in our exhibit or in our diagram there. And so that road is physically blocked there today. The phasing, the original phasing plan had the purple section as the last phase, and the yellow section as phase 3. That development was reversed, and so now the phasing is such that, actually let me back up to that one. The phasing was changed so that what's in purple became the current phase, and then the last phase is in yellow. That was a phasing request that was granted a couple years ago. The barricade, here's this picture from both sides, so you can see it's a quite substantial barricade as far as preventing access from those drives. And so part of what we talked about was service delivery issues. I'll ask Chief Folks of Murfreesboro Fire and Rescue just to share some of the issues his department and responders have had for this particular location, and then I'll come back up and make a couple more statements.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. As I mentioned in the previous city council meeting, when the council deferred this to staff to come back as a public meeting request and proceed through to the Planning Commission, Fire Marshal Carl Pease, or as I mentioned at that meeting, we've had numerous issues with response into this subdivision over the last couple of years, and numerous complaints to our office from people that live in the subdivision about the access being blocked for emergency vehicles, as well as other city resources and school buses and et cetera. And without going back into the details or in the calls, unless you have particular questions that we had last time, it is my recommendation as the fire chief that this barricade be removed. It is impeding our access to the remainder of this subdivision. Is extending our response times into this subdivision, and I would very much so say that it is definitely impacting public safety. I think you're probably going to hear from some folks that live in the neighborhood tonight that were here at the Planning Commission meeting that will offer some examples of things that we have had in the last few years access-wise into this subdivision on emergency medical calls. I think the one thing to note that when this was originally approved in 2005, Murfreesboro Fire and Rescue was very new into responding to emergency medical calls, and we were responding to those at a very basic level. We have now enhanced our emergency medical response as well as a lot of our firefighting and rescue capabilities. That enhanced emergency medical response really affects the way that this is going, and so it is definitely my recommendation that this barricade be removed.
Thank you, Chief. And just quickly, a couple more items. As Chief mentioned, there's routine delivery of city services, adds some route time to our schools and solid waste pickup and some other services. I think the big change for all of our society is the advent of GPS. There's very few things that are dispatched today for delivery of services, including emergency services, that don't rely on GPS. And so just a screenshot here just to make us aware that anybody that is searching for an address on Satinwood Drive, depending on where you are in the community, it will take you to one side or the other of the barricade without knowing about the barricade. And so while the intent was perhaps to reduce construction traffic, sometimes that actually resulted in double trips because someone would be dispatched by GPS, get to the barricade, realize they couldn't go that way, turn around and drive back out of the neighborhood and then back around for all that. So GPS advent has impacted the delivery of all services really for our community. And then just the enforcement and maintenance of this. We originally envisioned a portable device that could be moved by emergency service workers if they needed to. because it was easily removed by emergency services workers, that also meant it was easily defeated by others, and we found that to be a recurring problem, and so we continued to increase the hardness of the barricade until you get something out there that's completely unmanageable by hand. And one particular incident that the chief did not mention but resulted, we had a engine company that, responding to an incident, actually was inside the neighborhood, and the additional responders blocked their access back to Sulphur Springs, and so they were trapped, I guess is the word I would say, without the ability to go back out to Sulphur Springs Road until that accident scene was cleared. Our intent was to have this such a portable barrier that crew could have went, removed the barricade, and returned back to service, and it certainly didn't execute that way for us. The current status, and this again go back to the phasing, purple is the original last phase. All lots are permitted now in that purple phase. There are no lots available in estates at Prim Springs today. The yellow section is under construction. By that I mean they're building roads and drainage, and they, last check I had on it, those will be available very soon. The last permits that were issued in the purple section were issued in the middle of June. Those have had 2 months worth of construction, and so my check today revealed that one of those at least was to the framing stage, and I suspect both are, but the inspection records didn't indicate that, meaning that most of the heavy construction for those last 2 or 3 permits has already been completed. So what's the timing for the barricade? With zoning amendment approval tonight, I'm estimating it'll take us about 1 month to execute this. There's some paperwork things that we'll need to do with the developer. So assuming it's approved tonight and then following its second reading, we would move forward with the developer and his design team to get that paperwork in place and actually then remove the barricade. My estimates, without the zoning amendment, this requirement will run its course. There will be the build out of the lots, and so we estimate that lots will be available in 1 to 2 months in the yellow section, and then somewhere between 6 to 18 months of build out, depending on the takedown of the lots. I'm ready for any questions if you have them now or either after the public hearing, and I'll be glad to come back up at your request.
I want to thank staff for taking this. We had this discussion several months ago and said we felt like that the best thing to do is to take this back through the planning process, and that's why it's made it through Planning Commission to here. So I appreciate y'all doing that.
Yes, I'd be glad to answer any other questions you may have.
What was the Planning Commission vote? The Planning Commission vote, Councilman?
It was unanimous.
Planning Commission voted unanimous on July the 12th, following several participants in our public hearing from the neighborhoods.
All right.
I guess before we open the public hearing, for sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and say up front that all you can do is talk me out of it, because I'm going to vote for this. So you may want to allocate time accordingly.
All right. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium and say your name.
Good evening. Glenda Smart of 3012 Fallswood Drive. Just to follow up something that Mr. Huddleston addressed with regard to the current phase of the construction on Satinwood. I actually took a picture night before last, and I have copies if you guys would like to see them. All the construction is completed. The last house is being roofed. So with regard to any heavy construction that would need Satinwood, I think one of my neighbors addressed that there might be one cement truck that would have to come in to do some sidewalk work, but otherwise all the heavy construction would be coming off of Sulphur Springs in the back of the neighborhood. And one thing that brought up, and I'm not definitely going to talk you out of it, but one of my neighbors made a great comment during the Planning Commission meeting, and he stated that if you live in the area where we live, that's behind the barricade, with the heavy construction that is for the last phase of the neighborhood, there's a lot of heavy equipment back there, and we actually could be trapped. Because if you couldn't come down Satinwood and then you couldn't access us from Sulphur Springs, we would be stuck even if the GPS took you to the right side. So we totally ask you to support the removal of this barricade as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against?
Hello, good evening. My name is Brandon Smith, and I'm at 1906 Satinwood Drive, and I'll be brief. Thank you for your time. I just would like to point out a couple of things. Something that wasn't mentioned tonight that was mentioned in the past is that the barricade is actually in the middle of a block, so it's not this 700 block and below is on this side and the others are on this side. It's in the middle of the 1800 block. So I think 1824, for instance, is on one side and 1832 is on the other. So something that's important to understand is that even if you were to set some rules in place, that the fire marshal mentioned that they only have seconds to decide, are we going to go straight or are we going to turn here to go left? Other than that, the only other thing that I'd like to add is that we're not the only ones that the barricade inconveniences on the estate side, on the Prim Springs side. They also only have one exit out of their subdivision. So between the two subdivisions, there's well over 100 people on both sides that if something happens at the entrance to their subdivision, they're effectively trapped. And my understanding is that the other side is going to need some street work done as well. And so I would just say before you even get to the point where you're paving that road and blocking access to certain places, that you allow a second exit for both sides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against?
Hi, Crystal Wesley, 1914 Satinwood Drive. And just to kind of reiterate what everyone said, just the safety issue. There was about 10 months ago an accident on Sulphur Springs blocking the intersection of Sulphur Springs and Thompson Lane. So I actually had to be rerouted through Thompson Square, which is just slightly north of Prim Springs and the Satinwood Drive entrance. Fortunately, I'm from Murfreesboro, so I know lots of back roads and all that good stuff, so I knew how to get home. But I talked to some other neighbors who were kind of in a bind because they weren't familiar with the area and just kind of had to wait out the accident. So, and like my neighbor Brandon said, if something were to happen at the entrance of Prim Springs, there's no way for them to get out either. So, Mr. Pease, the fire marshal, did note that it's 8 turns to get into our neighborhood via Sulphur Springs as opposed to 2 turns to go down Thompson Lane and then straight onto Satinwood. So, if you've driven down Sulphur Springs, it's kind of curvy and a little 2-lane road, and then there's several turns in Prim Springs Estates that just kind of really slow down the first responders. But it's an eyesore also, just kind of, the neighborhoods are beautiful, nice homes, nice families, and then there's this awful barricade just there. So anyway, really appreciate you guys listening to us and look forward to it being gone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So there is another way in and out, and so there's really no need in us talking about this. Nothing, never mind.
We're talking about getting talked out of something here, all right? We don't want to get talked out of anything. Probably.
Anyone else wishing to speak for or against? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 17038 to amend the conditions applicable to approximately 46.2 acres in the planned residential development PRD district located along Sulphur Springs Road, estates at Prim Springs Road, PRD, formerly Oakley Springs.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, real quick. Mr. Charleston, I know I don't see Mr. Griffith here, but I rode out a couple of weeks ago just to take a look at everything. You don't have to come up. We may want to look at the older section of Satinwood on Prim Springs. That road is in pretty rough shape. Sure, absolutely.
Mayor, appreciate the opportunity to come back up and just give you a little explanation on that. We did some repairs earlier in the spring in anticipation of repaving that. The Satinwood Drive is on our paving schedule for this fiscal year, which ends June the 30th. And so we will resurface that roadway as our paving contractor makes it into the area.
Perfect.
and repaves that street. So I did want to give you that update.
Okay, perfect. I'm sure the residents of Prim Springs will appreciate that. So, all right, Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. To the residents, thank you for allowing us to go through the process. Sometimes you hear the wheels of government turn slow, but you know, I think the good thing, we made promises back with the PUD many years ago, and so going through now, we're able to go through that process and really let the residents know why we were doing it. So thank you all for bearing with us. So, you're free to go or free to stay. It's totally up to you guys. We've already voted, so no need to hang around. Thank y'all for coming out.
Thank you.
All right, pursuant to Resolution 17RPH 39 adopted by the City Council on July 20th, 2017, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider amending Murfreesboro City Code Appendix A zoning, Section 2 interpretations and definitions, Section 7 site plan review, and Section 26 off-street parking, queuing, and loading pertaining to pavement materials and site plan review. Murfreesboro Planning Department applicant 2017-808. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the July 31st, 2017 issue of a local newspaper.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. The amendments contained within this zoning ordinance revision are intended to clarify a few issues that we've run across within the zoning ordinance. So this revision has three major components. First, the revision would clarify what qualifies as a hard dustless surface. This is terminology that is used throughout the zoning ordinance, but it is never defined or clarified. With this amendment, hard dustless surface would be defined as concrete, asphalt, pavers, or other materials deemed appropriate by the planning director in consultation with the city engineer. The amendment would give the planning director the ability to approve materials such as gravel and tar and chip in limited circumstances, such as on service and storage areas. The second component of this revision would give the planning director the authority to send site plans that may otherwise qualify for administrative review to the Planning Commission under certain circumstances. One of those would be if the planning director determines that an extra level of scrutiny is warranted due to public interest. And the second would be if an applicant wishes to appeal a condition that has been imposed by staff during the administrative review process. The third component of this revision would clarify that administrative and/or planning commission review of site plans is required for all site plans, regardless of the role that the City Council or the Board of Zoning Appeals may play in the process. We already follow this, but the wording in the zoning ordinance is a bit ambiguous, so we wanted to propose language that would clarify these review processes. The Planning Commission reviewed this amendment at its July 12th meeting and voted unanimously to send this forward to you with a favorable recommendation. Staff can answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for staff? All right. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this amending our code, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 17039, amending Murfreesboro City Code, Appendix A zoning, Section 2, interpretations and definitions, Section 7, site plan review, and Section 26, off-street parking, queuing, and loading pertaining to pavement materials and site plan review.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider recommendations of the Assistant Planning Director to schedule public hearings for a zoning along Joby Jackson Parkway and Manchester Pike, zoning along Shelbyville Pike and Joby Jackson Parkway, Marketplace at Savannah Ridge, annexation plan and service and annexation petition along Osborne Lane, rezoning RS10 and zoning RS10 PRD simultaneous with annexation along Osborne Lane, zoning to commercial fringe along Manson Pike, rezoning PRD along Veterans Parkway, Kimbrough Woods PRD, annexation plan of services and annexation petition along Cushing Avenue.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Staff would recommend September the 28th for all 7 public hearings.
September 28th? Did you say September 28th?
Yes, sir. Due to state law regarding the annexations, those have to be at least 30 days out.
Move we set a public hearing for September 28th.
Second.
Motion second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for adoption Resolution 17R22 and acknowledgement and support of the City of Murfreesboro 2035 Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Good evening, Mayor McFarland and members of council. Should have said that earlier. The resolution that you have before you is similar to the resolution that you saw when we brought the North Highland study and the Historic Bottoms Planning study to you back in April. The Planning Commission adopted those two studies, and the Planning Commission also adopted, after 2.5 to 3 years of hard work by our consultants and by staff and by the City Council and the Planning Commission, as well as the citizens. The citizens were a very, very valuable part of this project, and the input that our consultants and staff received from the public helped to shape this plan. So after a lot of hard work and input, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on the 2035 plan on July the 12th, and then voted to adopt the plan the same night. So before you tonight, we have this resolution of support and acknowledgement. This document is an advisory document. It's not binding, but we do use it as a very important tool, not only in land use decisions, but in also looking at other needs for the city, such as parks and recreation, infrastructure. It'll be a guiding document for years to come. And so we would ask that the City Council vote to approve the resolution of support and acknowledgement for the Murfreesboro 2035 Comprehensive Plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
No.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider recommendations of the Chief of Police. Thank you, Mr. Palmley. Application for fiscal year 2017 Justice Assistance Grant, JAG, and enter an interlocal agreement with the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office to share the funds. Mr. Chief. And if I remember, Mr. Lyons, I ask this every year, but is this the grant that Hiram let
This
Mr.
is the
Lester?
Hiram Lester grant, yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't know if for y'all that sat on, Hiram Lester would come every year, and this was Hiram's job when he was on the council. So he's Major Lester, right?
Major Lester, yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Before we were requesting the application for the grant, the Burn JAG grant, the application is due September 5th. It can only be entered upon by the mayor, city manager, or the official contact, and our official contact would be, if so deemed, would be Sergeant Kyle Evans. The city of Murfreesboro administers the grant on behalf of the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office and ourselves. We split the grant in half. DOJ has already allocated the $59,000, said we're eligible for that, and it just needs our application to move forward with that. The intent of the agency is to purchase tasers, less lethal devices, with our portion of the money. And I'm available to answer any questions.
All right, we'll need to adopt Resolution 17R23, authorizing the application for the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Grant Program for 2016-2020.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider recommendations of the Assistant City Attorney for the proposed water line easement to CUD.
Yes, Mayor, council members, again, recently the city purchased a couple of tracts of land out along the north side of State Route 96. We expect these at some point to be at least partly used for parkland and perhaps for other city purposes. CUD is running a major water line along 96 and has asked for an easement from the city on a portion of one of those parcels. This will provide water to that land for whatever use we intend to make of it. It's a large pipe. I don't remember the size of it, but it'll be sufficient to provide fire hydrants and fire protection as well as potable water to the facility. With that, Planning Commission has recommended approval of this, and we ask that the council authorize us to grant this easement to CUD.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have a few beer permits.
We do. We have a couple of nonprofit special event permit applications. One is for Saturday night at 1660 Middle Tennessee Boulevard, and the next one is for the next weekend at Oakland Park. The applications are in order. We have another special event permit for an event at 816 Old Salem Road. That fundraiser application is also in order. We have a ownership and name change for a market at 1411 South Church Street. That application is in order for the background check. They do need to finish up their building codes inspections. We have a new restaurant coming at a location that's had beer before at 1310 Northwest Broad Street. And the background check is in order for that location. They do need to finish up their building codes inspections. We would issue those upon your approval and those inspections being completed. The special event permits could be issued tomorrow if they're approved tonight.
We'll be tardy for the party. Somebody make a motion?
We have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have one statement that needs to be paid.
We'll pay the bills.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Any other business from staff or city council? Want to remind everyone, Vice Mayor Skels Harris brought us some, you can't even see with this thing on. So eclipse glasses. So the 21st on Monday, the eclipse is 1:20 to 1:40, is that right?
Yeah, the peak period. Yes, sir.
So,
There is an item for other business.
Oh. Angela?
Yes. Thank you. Sorry for the delay.
We'll stand adjourned.
Do have. Thank you, sir. We do have one item for other business. If I could ask your approval for a reimbursement resolution 17-R-24 for the design and construction of West Park, which is located at Burton Knob Road. We are currently, as you know, working with Kimley Horn and Associates for concept development, design development, final design, permitting, construction drawings, bid documents, and et cetera. This is a reimbursement resolution in the amount of $720,000 that is recommended before you. In the forthcoming 2017 capital improvement program, funds are requested for the project. It's noted that this is not a request for an increase to project funding, but rather an accounting measure to allow the project to move forward now without pause and waiting for those 2017 capital allocations. Welcome any questions.
No comments. I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Are we still looking good at the end of next year for the park being ready?
We are moving forward at a rapid rate as per your instruction.
You ought to be a politician with answers like that. So.
Tell you what.
There you
Okay. All right, Ms. Skels Harris has one comment.
We just want to wish City Manager Rob Lyons a happy birthday on the 23rd.
Thank you.
Ah, yeah. Happy birthday, Rob.
Happy birthday.
Should we sing?
No.
We'll stand adjourned.
See, the school's